ladies, it's Raquel here. Welcome to Women Living Torah. And yes, as the title says, homemakers, we are not going to be able to budget ourselves out of inflation. I know, because I am revising our grocery budget up for like the fourth time this year. It's been absolutely insane how prices keep going up. And I am continuing to downgrade our lifestyle, and I'm still budgeting more than I ever have before. And I know that a lot of you are feeling that same pressure. And so that's why I want us together to look at the Proverbs 31 woman. And I want to encourage us to be producers and not consumers only. And when I say not consumers only, I mean that we're still going to consume, okay? So we're looking at a balance here of production and consumption. It's not going to be all production, but we also don't want to be all consumption. And I think that we've definitely been on the all consumption side in our society for a very long time, at least for as long as the emphasis has been taken off the home. You know, everyone's leaving the home. Everyone has to have their careers outside of the home. The children are leaving the home to go to public school, to all their extracurricular activities. The emphasis has been taken off the home, and we've lost a whole industry as a result of it. And our home economies are suffering because we no longer have these skills and this knowledge base in order to build our home economies. But what I hope to encourage us with today is the Proverbs 31 woman, and how she was so industrious in her home, how she produced, how she generated, how she grew the home economy through the work of her hand, through the skilled labor that she put into her home. And we can imitate her. We can follow some of the principles, maybe even do some of the same exact things that she was doing, maybe not the same exact things, but we can take her as our example, and we can ask the Lord to teach us and impress upon us what changes we can make in our life and how we can also begin to produce and not just consume. And I do believe that this is what Yahweh wants for us as women and as his people in general. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 28, you will read blessings that Yahweh is giving his people for their obedience. And a lot of what Deuteronomy chapter 28 has to say is that if we obey Yahweh, then the blessing of obedience is production. We're going to produce from our soil. We're going to produce from our livestock. Our barns are going to overflow. We're going to be blessed with the work of our hands. We're not going to borrow, we're going to lend. And so the blessings that Yahweh wants for us have to do with productivity. And I certainly see productivity in the life of the Proverbs 31 woman. So we're going to go verse by verse. We're going to slow this down a little bit. We're going to look at how the Proverbs 31 woman was a producer and not a consumer only. And hopefully you're going to get some ideas of how you can be producing and not consuming only in your life. I know that I've been encouraged as I've been doing this little study myself, and I'm definitely going to be looking for more ways that I can be a producer. So let's start with verse 10. I'm reading from the Tree of Life version. It says, "An accomplished woman who can find? Her value is far beyond rubies." So the first thing it says about this woman in Proverbs chapter 31 is that she is accomplished. I know other versions say capable, and other versions say virtuous. So in other words, she is skillful. She knows how to do things. She's competent, or she's increasing in learning, because Proverbs, I think the very first chapter, maybe like verse 6 or verse 9, something like that, it says that a wise man or a wise woman will increase in learning. And so we don't have to have it all together from the first moment we become a homemaker, but we are going to increase in learning. We are going to increase in knowledge and skills, and that's going to help us to be able to be producers and not consumers only. So then we look at verse 11 and 12. It says, "Her husband's heart trusts in her, and he lacks nothing valuable. She brings him good and not harm all the days of her life." I love that verse for just marriage in general. I think it's very inspiring and convicting. But it says she brings him good, which is indicating that she is active, that she's taking initiative, that she's not just waiting for opportunities to produce and to be a blessing in her home and to her family, but she is actually pursuing those opportunities. She's not just waiting for them to fall into her lap, but she's pursuing them. And we're going to see this as we go on with some very real examples. And I also want to mention here that this pairs really nicely, this activity of the wise Proverbs 31 woman, with what is said about wisdom and the foolish woman in Proverbs chapter 9. Now, Proverbs chapter 9 contrasts wisdom and foolishness, and it personifies wisdom and foolishness as women. So I'm not going to tell you what Proverbs 9 says. I'm just going to encourage you and challenge you to go read Proverbs chapter 9 and see what that contrast is. See the activity of the wise woman and see the idleness and slothfulness of the foolish woman. Drop my little notebook here. So let's go down to verse 13. It says, she selects wool and flax, and her hands work willingly. So this is the first way that it's going to tell us that she is producing and not consuming only. She is taking raw ingredients and she is adding value to them. In this case, she's taking wool and flax. From wool, she's making yarn for needle crafts or clothing or whatnot. From the flax, she's making linen for material and clothing, perhaps some other things as well. And so we can imitate this principle of taking raw materials and producing more value from them. It could be something like taking raw milk and making a plethora of dairy products that you can make from raw milk that you can't make from commercial pasteurized homogenized milk, which is just so crazy considering how like raw milk, it has this really big stigma in our society, yet it has nourished us for generations. Don't get me on my soapbox about milk, but it is interesting because you can make so much from raw milk. It can be so healthy for you. Anyhow, take raw milk and it doesn't spoil. It becomes kefir, it becomes butter, it becomes buttermilk, it becomes yogurt, it becomes clabber, it becomes curds. Like, it becomes so many things, so useful, and you're taking that one ingredient, you're adding value to it, and it's become so many more things. It might be making food from scratch. So instead of always buying pasta noodles at the store, maybe we are becoming producers and we are going to make the pasta noodles ourselves. And I am going to talk about like, well, what about, you could produce the flour or whatnot. I'm going to talk about kind of that balance between choosing where in the production and consumption cycle to insert yourself, because obviously there is kind of like the extreme of production and there's the extreme of consumption, and we're going to find ourselves somewhere in the middle, nice and balanced. Another way that we can be taking raw materials and adding value to them besides food would be salves, lotions, hygiene products, things that normally we're buying from the store. Instead, think about, can I produce this myself? Think about laundry detergent. Can I make this myself? And chances are what you make is going to be way healthier and way better than what you can buy in the store. You might be turning tablecloths and curtains into clothing. There are just so many ways that you can take raw ingredients and you can work willingly with your hands like the Proverbs 31 woman and produce something. The next verse, 14 and 15, she is like merchant ships, bringing her sustenance from afar. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and portions for her servant girls. Now, with these scriptures, I'm thinking like she is maximizing her resources. Why is she bringing her food from afar? If I'm bringing my food from afar, if I'm going to different stores, if I'm being intentional about where I'm buying things, it's probably because I want to maximize my resource of money, my financial resources I am trying to maximize. And maybe that was the same for her. And then what does she do in the very next verse after she's like the merchant ships and she brings her food from afar? She provides sustenance for her whole household and the portion for her maids. So application for us, we can be shopping around for good deals. It doesn't have to just be on food. It might be car insurance. It might be your cell phone plan. And then also we can maximize resources as in physical things. So she takes that food that she's brought from afar and she provides sustenance for her family. So how can I do the same? How can I maximize my resources to provide for my household? Maybe it means that I'm going to figure out how I can maximize a whole chicken. And this has actually been one of my favorite things to do, is like figure out all the different ways that I can use a whole chicken. And I've got a little list here, so I'm going to share it with you because it's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's pretty cool. I'm kind of nerdy though. So the first thing I do with a whole chicken is I roast it, and we have a meal from it, and all the juices that come in that roast, I pour that out, and that is going to be some really nice gelatin and some really nice chicken fat. So I've got three things right there: chicken fat, gelatin, and the meat for the roast. The next thing I do after that meal is I pull all the meat that I can off that's still really nice. I'm not going like super detailed. There's going to still be, like rib meat, some wings that are left or something. Like, I'm not being super particular, but I'm definitely getting all the breast meat off, all the bigger pieces of dark meat off. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it in a casserole or a soup or some other dish. And then I'm going to take that carcass, which still has some meat on it, and I'm going to boil it for 30 minutes. And that's going to give me a really nice meat stock. But then I'm not done with it yet. Like, you thought meat stock was the last thing. No, 30 minutes is meat stock. Then I'm going to take that carcass out of that stock, and I'm going to pull all the scraps off. I'm talking cartilage, skin, any little bits of meat that's now falling off the bone. It's so easy to debone a chicken that's been boiled. I'm going to get every single little edible thing up, basically taking everything except for the bones. And I'm going to set that aside for my scrap cakes. And this is a way that I can make organ meats like heart and whatnot, and mix it up with all these scraps and fry them for breakfast. I'll put a link to a recipe for scrap cakes or scrapple in my description box if you're interested. But I've made another meal. So I've got my meat stock, I've got my scrap cake ingredients, and then I'm going to take the bones that I have left and I'm going to boil them for like several hours. And this is going to make broth, bone broth. And then you could take the bones that are now like absolutely brittle and dehydrate them and grind them to powder, and you have bone meal. So from this one chicken, we have a whole slew of ingredients, of meals, of things that we might use in our garden or whatnot. It's just pretty amazing. And there's other things like that. Maybe it's apple scrap vinegar that you're making from apple scraps that you have. We're looking at ways that we can maximize our resources, and we can gather up the fragments of everything that maybe it was waste, but like those scraps, we're turning it into something new. Or like the bones, it's becoming bone meal. We're turning it into something new. We're producing something from it. So then going on to verse 16, it says, she considers a field and buys it. From the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. And so what I think about here is that she's creating opportunities for herself. She's not just waiting, and for her family. It's not just for herself, right? She is not just waiting for things to happen to her, but she is going out and she's pursuing them. She sees this empty field and she thinks, that could be a vineyard, which could produce my family with everything that we need as far as maybe wine or grapes or whatnot. And it could also generate income for our family, another source of income for our family. So maybe she's sending out a seller finance offer. You can go to your county appraiser's office. If you see a piece of land, you're like, hey, no one's using it. Maybe they want to sell it to me. Go to your county appraiser's office. See who is paying the property taxes on that piece of land, get their address, mail them a letter, make an offer, if you're able to do it, and see what they say. The worst they can say is no, right? I see the Proverbs 31 doing this. She is making opportunities for herself, whatever that looks like. Maybe it means that we're taking our finances, which, by the way, notice that the Proverbs 31 woman is engaged in the financial situation of her family, but maybe it means that she's taking some of their finances and she's investing it into something that she deems important: gold, silver, the stock market, livestock, I don't know, books, that's me. She's investing into things and she's making opportunities for her family. Let's look at verse 17. It says, she girds herself with strength and invigorates her arms. And I think here's just a really good principle, that the Proverbs 31 woman is not afraid of hard work. And that's what it takes to be a producer. It's not easy. It's easy to just consume. It's easy to have stuff come to us. It's easy to, go to the store and buy the meat stock on the shelf. It takes more effort. It's not that it's hard, as in it's too manually demanding, takes too much of our strength or effort to do, but it does take our effort to do. And so it's not going to just fall in our lap to be a producer, but we can gird ourselves with strength and invigorate our arms to do the work that we need to do to bless our families, to bless ourselves, because we're also benefiting as our family benefits. So going on to verse 18, it says, she discerns that her business is good. Her lamp never goes out at night. So notice here she has a business, okay? And it could be that vineyard that she has bought and planted. It could also be something that we're going to read about later on. But even if it was just the business of homemaking, which in itself is a big job, notice that she is reflective and she's evaluating on what is and what is not working. So if we want to be producers, the first thing we can start producing is solutions to our problems. Instead of just escaping to our cell phones and social media to try to get away from our problems, let's start looking looking for solutions and being producers of those solutions. Verse 19, it says, she extends her hands to the spindle and her palms grasp the spinning wheel. So again, we see that she's working with raw materials, because you don't use a spindle unless you've got like yarn and you're going to create something, right? But I also want to note that we don't know where she is in the production consumption cycle as she's going here. Like, does she raise the sheep that produce the wool that she's now spinning? Or did she consume the wool from a producer, and now she is turning that into something else, and she's being part of that production loop. And this is where I want to talk about that balance of production and consumption, that I don't want you to think that I'm advocating for us to go to the extreme of having to produce all of our own food and all of our own clothing and do everything for ourselves and be completely self-reliant. I don't think that's realistic, and I don't think that she does this. Like it says, she is like the merchant fleet's ships bringing her food from afar. She was also relying on her community to work together, as Yahweh created us to do, working together as a community to meet the needs of her family and of herself. But everything that we have, everything that we consume, has some type of consumption production cycle to it. So for example, I consume food, and those scraps I use to produce feed for my chickens. Then my chickens that I'm raising are producing eggs for us, and they're producing compost for our garden. When they give us eggs, we then eat those eggs, and again goes back through that cycle of now it's making feed for the chickens and it's going to produce more eggs, or it produces compost. That feed that I'm giving to the chicken produces compost as they're turning everything. And then what can I do with that compost? I can use it, I can consume it to grow a garden. And then it's going to produce me more food, which I'm then going to consume. So there is like this cycle to everything where there's consumption, there's production, there's consumption, there's production. And so we don't have to raise all the chickens that we eat, but maybe we can produce the fat and the gelatin and the broth and the meals from that chicken that we are consuming from someone else's production. There is a balance there. Verse 20, it says, she spreads out her palms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. And so she is producing not only for her household, like it says earlier, but so that she can bless others and be generous with others too. And I think that should always be at the forefront of our minds as well. Then verse 21 and 22 says, she is not afraid of snow for her house, for her whole household is clothed in scarlet wool. She makes her own luxurious coverings. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Notice that, first of all, she's producing her own clothing, which is great. We can do that as well. But the result of her being a producer, it says she's not afraid of the snow because she has used her skill and her resources to produce what the family needs. And so being a producer has resulted in more peace in her life. She's not relying on the store to provide warm clothing for her family. She's doing it herself. And of course, there's nothing wrong with going out and buying coats for our children, but I'm just giving this example of what she's doing. And this can apply so much beyond just clothing, right? Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 5 talks about when you go into captivity, Yahweh's saying this, I want you to build houses and plant gardens. And I just think, wow, that's really interesting, because who is producing our food? Wouldn't we give just about anything to make sure our children are fed? And so it can put us in a really precarious situation if we are relying entirely on the government or stores or this whole fragile system to hold up to be able to meet all of our needs. Like I said, I'm not saying all production, no consumption, but definitely we need to be more self-reliant. Not that we are reliant in ourselves, but we need to do more, be able to do more for ourselves and not be completely dependent on people and systems that are not strong, that don't have our best interests at heart, that aren't following Yahweh's ways. And so there's more peace when we are a producer and when we're able to do more for ourselves. Verse 23 says, her husband is respected at the city gates when he sits among the elders of the land. I think this is an interesting verse because it's about her husband. It's not about the Proverbs 31 woman, when all of this is supposed to be about this wonderful woman. But I think it is about the wife as well. I think it's about her, because Proverbs chapter 12, I think it's verse 4, says that a virtuous or a capable or accomplished woman is a crown to her husband, but she that makes ashamed is like rottenness to his bones. So through our productivity, through our industry in the home, we are going to bring honor to our husbands and to our families. Verse 24, it says, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes to the merchants. So there's two things here. First of all, maybe this is what her business is that it talked about earlier. She is making and selling linen garments and sashes to the merchants. And so for us, this might mean that we are selling something that we are already doing for our family. So I sell ferment starts. I do a lot of kefir and sourdough and other things of that nature, June scobies. And so I just, I naturally get more kefir grains. I naturally get more June scobies. I naturally would have an overflowing amount of sourdough starter if I didn't use it. I'm already feeding it. So I just list it on Facebook Marketplace and people buy from me all the time. It's not anything out of the way for me. It's just something that I'm selling that I have excess of. If you're decluttering your home, you're already decluttering your home, take a quick picture of some of those things that you can sell and make sure you price them at a good price because you want to sell it. Like, you're decluttering it, you're getting rid of it. So it doesn't matter if you're only getting $10 from it. If it can be used by someone else and you can generate something for your family from that, then it's a win-win in my opinion. And then also notice that you could also say like these sashes that she's making. I thought about this. She's making linen garments. She's also making sashes. And when I make, clothing or different things out of material, a lot of times I get like these really long strips. And I'm thinking, that's a sash, right? Her sashes very well could be fragments that are left over, but she's not letting it go to waste. She's using up those fragments so that nothing is lost. She's being resourceful with what she has. And so again, going back to these things that maybe it would normally be waste, and we're thinking of ways that we can use them, again, to grow our home economy and to save us some money where we're not having to cut more things out of our budget than we have to. Verse 25, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the day to come. So again, it's just this idea that as producers, there is more peace, and she finds dignity and self-respect in the hard work that she's doing, in what she's bringing to the table. And I think being a producer is an empowering role, and all of us can be a producer to some extent. Verse 26 says, she opens her mouth with wisdom. A lesson of kindness is on her tongue. So again, we see that she is a producer of wisdom and lessons in kindness. She's a teacher. She's not just consuming edification for herself. She's not just consuming wisdom for herself, but she's putting it back out there too. She's generating it. And while this may not be explicitly talking about producing money, it can produce and generate income for our families as well. E-courses, teaching people how to do things through blogging or YouTubing, that can actually bring in some money. And then verse 27 kind of summarize what this Proverbs 31 woman is doing. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. As a Proverbs 31 woman who is producing, her industry, the skilled labor of her hands, is an irreplaceable revenue. It's not maybe a financial net gain. Maybe she's bringing in money through her vineyard and her sashes. Maybe she's not, but she's making that broth, which she then doesn't have to go out and buy, right? She is generating for her family, and we can be doing the same thing. Verse 28 through 31 ends it all. Her children arise and bless her. Her husband also praises her. Many daughters have excelled, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears Adonai will be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands. Let her deeds be her praise at the gates. So of course, we know all of these efforts that she's doing, all of this energy and time that she is putting into learning how to do things and then doing those things is blessing her family. It's blessing her husband. It's blessing her children. But I also want to note that it is blessing her as well. Verse 31, give her of the fruit of her hands. Let her deeds be her praise at the gates. It is a blessing to us to be a producer and not a consumer only. I want to encourage you just to ask Yahweh to show you ways that you can be a producer, how you can have this blessing for obedience of producing in your home as a homemaker. We may not be able to cut our budget any further. We're kind of down to the basics, down to the necessity, but Yahweh can show us how we can produce more for our families and do more for our families. And maybe it's just this little thing that comes to your mind, this little impression. Go ahead and obey in that little step, and you never know where it will lead. I know that, like, as a homemaker, as a brand new homemaker, I was learning how to cook from scratch. And then that kind of led into, okay, let's get some chickens so I can produce our own eggs and our own chicken meat. And then that led into this, and then that led into that. And then next thing you know, we had this whole farm going on. And now we have sheep, and we have geese, and we have ducks, and we have chickens, and we have a garden, and all these types of things. Although we're in a rental situation now, so we're kind of like feeling a little displaced. I'm not gonna lie. I feel like a farm without a farm. It's kind of strange, but Yahweh will provide in time. And now I'm feeling this, like this nudge to maybe go even a step further and start producing for others, as far as like a sheep farm and things like that, because I'm getting people all the time asking me if we have extra lamb, and I'm like, no, I already sold my 3 extra this year, or my 5 extra this year, or whatever. So whatever impression you might have, whatever step that, however insignificant it may seem to you to be, just obey in that step. Do that thing, start producing in that little way, and it's going to grow to where you're producing so much more than you ever thought you could or would have, 10 years before. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you were encouraged by the Proverbs 31 woman being a producer. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Let me know different ways that you're producing in your home, because I know all of us are to some extent producing in our homes. Let's give some ideas to each other. Until next time, I pray that Yahweh would bless you and keep you. I'll talk with you later. Goodbye.